You have it?
Yes.
All right. Uh, Let me just close some windows here. Uh, just in due diligence, I guess I'll correct an error from last week that I
Uh-huh.
realized I made with respect to the square of opposition. My inference was correct, but my premise was false.
Uh-huh.
Um, I mean, it doesn't really amount to any difference because it's still the same kind of upshot. But so I'll just correct it for now
Yeah.
because I can't stand to leave it hanging. Actually, I guess it's chapter three. I mean, I was thinking about ways that you can get values for all of the propositions,
hmm
E, I, and O,
Yeah.
with the minimal number of rules, right?
hmm
Like, the rules are just contrary, subalternation, contradiction, and sub-contrary, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of interesting to think about that, though, and to think about how many rules you absolutely need to get different values and what values you need to start with to get
hmm
the different values, So, like, what I realized is that it's true that uh, what one thing you could say is that contradiction does presuppose the contrary and the subalternation. Uh, but it's I mean it's a little bit more it's not really more complicated. Basically, the error that I made last time was that I forgot that it's not a simple bivalence between A and E. A simple bivalence would mean if A, then not E. If Well, that is true. Actually, what I failed to realize though is that it's not true that if not E, then A.
Mm.
That would be false.
If not E, then A, and that would be false.
No, 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 no. Both
What did
E
you say?
and A can be false at the same time.
So, yeah, again, clarify A and E are the
A is affirmative universal and E
right, and E is the negative
universal. Yeah.
universal,
Yeah.
and they
And
both can be
just
true at the same time.
when I was putting my notes together, I was just thinking of them as being in a simple kind of like bijective relationship, like true and
Mm.
false.
Okay, yeah.
Like it's a toggle switch, a binary toggle switch or something. But of course, it's
Mm-hmm.
not like that because they can both be false.
They can both be false, right?
Right. And so the all the inferences I made were correct, but the
Mm-hmm.
first proposition that I put there was not E then A. Of course, that's not true. And
Right,
that was
right, right.
in last week's notes. I changed it for this week's notes.
Okay. Oh, that's right. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the upshot doesn't change very much. Essentially,
hmm
what it should have been is instead of not E, then A then I, and then you can get at least one of the contradictions,
Right.
because you'll have the I and you'll have the not E.
hmm
So, this would be much easier if I could try to do it on a blackboard, but maybe you can just follow my verbal description of it. So let's say that you've got subalternation as a rule and you've got contrariety as a rule,
hmm
and you start with just A, and you know if A, then not E,
hmm
and you also know if A, then I, then you also know the following, not E and I.
hmm
But one thing that's actually kind of interesting to think about is what is the difference between not E and I and not E if and only if I,
hmm
right? Because if and only if is actually a much richer logical relationship.
Right.
And so it's not going to have um, the same truth functions. For instance, Uh, well, anyway, we could do it with truth tables to demonstrate that, but you could also just look at compare the truth tables between a biconditional and a conjunction, you
Hmm.
know. But that's something that's kind of interesting from subalternation and contrariety. For one thing, you can only get one pair of the contradictions,
Yeah.
right? The not E and the I, and you have to start with a positive, a true A. If you start with not A, then you essentially have nothing,
Yeah.
right? Because you can't infer not I from not A. You can't infer E from not A.
Not
It
A.
could be
Yeah.
E, it could be not E, it could be I, it could be not I.
Hmm.
If it's, for instance, not A and not I, but it's E and O, for
Hmm.
instance, right?
Yeah.
And so you do need subalternation, or not subalternation, you do need contradiction as a rule for two reasons. One, to get all four values
Mm.
from any statement. So if I start with A, if I want to have all four values, then I need to have contradiction as
Yeah.
the same with E. If I start with not A, then I need contradiction to get pretty much any of the other values,
Hmm.
right? Um,
Yeah.
and so I'm not sure exactly what his point is in that chapter because contradiction is a an indispensable rule in the square of opposition if you want to get, first of all the values and their logical relationships.
Right.
I guess his point is simply that um, I'm not sure exactly what his point is. I wonder, let me think about this. If you didn't have contrariety, but you had subalternation and contradiction, you could still get three values,
Hmm.
right? And actually, those values would maintain their logical relationships. Because if I had A and
Yeah.
contradiction, so I know not O,
Hmm.
and I have subalternation and I know I, then
Right.
not only do I have three values, but they're the right logical relationships.
Hmm.
Whereas if I only have contrariety and subalternation, I can get three values, but then the relationship between, say, the E and the O, I'm not going to have that. I'm only going to have the values, not E and O,
Right.
right? And so
Mm.
I'm not sure exactly what his point is. I mean, I suppose on one level, um, I was thinking through this to see if you could derive contradiction from any of the other rules, but you can't.
Yeah.
And so, uh, and it's not even really obvious that the contrary is somehow a more fundamental rule, right? Because I
Mm.
can get a closer approximation of the relationships and the values in the square of opposition without the contrary, but with the contradiction.
Mm. Okay. How
I
would
don't know if
you
that
get
makes sense, but just think through it yourself.
how would you get the oh, I see. So you're saying you could get say that again? With just the
Okay, so if I don't have contradiction at all,
yeah.
right? Like let's say I only have subalternation. So if I've got
Mm.
A, I know that I've got I.
Right.
And let's say I also have the contrary. So I know that if I've got A, then I've got not E,
Yeah.
right? I don't know very much if I have not A, but at least if I know A, then I know I've got I and I've got not E.
Yeah.
The problem with that is that, so first of all, I can only get the three values. I can't get the O because I've got not E, but I can't infer from not E that O.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't, because I don't have contradiction, I can't infer from A that not O
Mm.
because there is no rule. I'm not
Mm.
assuming that rule.
Right.
Okay, so I've got three values. Okay, it's not all four. I can't get all four without contradiction, or at least without contradiction. And actually, even with the subcontrary, if I've got I don't know whether I've got O or not O. I've got the contrary, I've got the subalternation, and I've got
Proposition.
A, and I can
Hmm.
infer I from A, and I can infer not E from A, and I can't infer anything from not E.
Hmm. Yeah.
But it just so happens I've already got I from A than I,
Hmm.
right? So I've got those values, not E, and I've got I, but I don't have the logical relationship between them,
Right.
right? Okay. You compare that to contradiction and subalternation instead of contrary and subalternation.
Hmm.
Okay, so I've got A. I can infer not O because I've got contradiction. I can infer I. And so I guess maybe there's a question about whether I've got the logical relationship between I and not O,
Right.
right? Subcontrary doesn't give me very much.
Hmm.
But what's interesting is that I've got the three values, but in addition to having I, and not O, I suppose, maybe there's a question, maybe like not E or E, maybe the E is, maybe we should weight that, the knowledge of that
Hmm.
higher than the knowledge of O or something. But it seems
Yeah.
to me that you've got the three values, but you've got stronger logical relationships because
Hmm.
with the not E and the I, you don't have that logical relationship.
Hmm.
No way to infer,
Yeah.
you only have the values,
Right. Right. Right.
right? Yeah, so it
Yeah.
seems like actually maybe contradiction is more indispensable than the contrary, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't think he's making an argument about indispensability.
Yeah.
I guess his argument was I should go back and read, but I guess his point was something like the contradiction presupposes the contrary. Um,
Mm.
but he doesn't give an argument for that, and it's not obvious why that's true.
Yeah.
Um, because as I
So
said,
the.
from
Hmm.
if I've only got the contrary and I've got A and I've got not E,
Hmm.
then I can't actually infer A's contradiction, right? I can't get O from only the contrary. And I understand that he's saying it's a necessary condition and not a sufficient condition. So he's not saying that you can get contradiction just out of the other rules. It's
Yeah.
not sufficient, but it's not obvious that it's necessary either.
Yeah. 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 I don't know why in the square of opposition they just didn't go A and not A.
Because you can have A be false.
Oh. Oh, I see.
So not A would be A is false, in which case maybe E is true or false, right? We know that I is
Hmm.
false, so that would be not I, right? That's why.
Okay.
And that maybe was part of the confusion you had last week, where it was like, if no S is P, that statement's true, but isn't it also false? No, it's not, because E
Hmm.
is a different premise. It's a different proposition than A.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Yeah. So, I thought that was actually kind of interesting. And I also just wanted to correct my error from last week.
Mhm.
But
Yeah.
it actually kind of unpacks some of how the square of opposition works in a way that you know, um, I don't know, I suppose gives you a stronger taste for what those rules are actually doing.
Hmm.
I mean, there is actually a question about whether logic is normative or whether it's simply descriptive of how a particular mammal strings ideas together.
Yeah.
You know, whether logic is a description or something like a rule for doing the right thing. You
Right.
but in any case, it's also kind of fun to
Yeah.
think through those rules and think how can what's the minimum number of rules I can use to get all the values, and even getting all
Hmm.
the values, is that enough, or do I need the rules to know what their logical relationship is? One way you would check that is, yeah, have you ever done anything with truth tables?
Oh, a long time ago.
Long time ago, yeah.
Yeah.
Truth tables usually help with that. There are some significant differences between, say, Boolean logic and Aristotelian logic. There are two big ones. Well, one is the existential import thing, um, which has to do with being able to essentially on Boolean algebra, A and E don't really have any value. Um,
Mm,
Universals, that is to say, they don't exist. We have no knowledge of the universal. All we have, right? So that it kind of strips that away. The other thing about it is with conditionals, you have the possibility of vacuous truths if you're just using material implication. We
mm,
don't have to worry about that. Maybe at some point that will come up, but essentially, if instead of thinking about this sort of conditional as grounded consequent, this is the sort of conditional that Kant writes about, and it's something also that is entailed in the square of opposition. When you're thinking of what is the rule of say subalternation, the rule is A then I, and the idea is that A is the ground for I as consequent. So what that
yeah.
means is like that's the way we normally think about conditionals, right? Like
Hmm.
if I don't pay my rent on time, I'm going to be kicked
Hmm.
out of my house or
Yeah.
my apartment. So that, that might be true or false. Um, but with material conditionals, a couple of things are interesting. One, there doesn't have to be any relevance between the antecedent and the consequent.
Mm,
You're only worried about truth values. So,
mm,
like for instance, if I could say if I don't pay my rent on time, the the moon revolves around the earth.
right.
And those premises are both true, so the conditional is true,
Yeah.
right? Whereas, with Kant or most say pre um, 20th century philosophy, that kind of conditional, I mean, it's not even really obviously a conditional because those things have nothing to do with each other. The other
Hmm.
thing that is weird about material conditionals is that um, if the antecedent is false, any proposition with the conditional is true.
Oh,
So,
if the antecedent was false.
yeah, so if I say my name is Mariah Carey,
Hmm.
or I don't know, my name is Justin Bieber or something.
Yeah.
If my name is Justin Bieber, then there are sentient elephants living on the moon.
Mm.
That proposition is true, but it's vacuously true.
Oh, I see. What?
Okay,
Okay.
and that would take a while to explain what that
Mm,
means. Essentially, you can kind of think of it as like a contract.
mm.
Um, I want to get into Kant though. I don't want to waste
Yeah.
everyone's. Well, we
Yeah.
have
Yeah.
an
Yeah.
hour. We have an hour. Essentially, what it is something like this. Like if you were to think about it like a contract.
Mm,
Okay. Let's say there's like a company or something, and there are some employees working on a project, and then those employees have a manager, and then that manager has a boss, like a CEO or something. Okay, so you've got like three levels. You've got employees, manager, boss.
hmm.
And then let's say we have the following conditional. If the employees turn in their reports or finish their project on time, if all of them finish their projects on time, then the manager will get a raise. And then you can think of it as there being a higher order rule. If the manager does not abide by that, then the manager will be punished.
Mm,
Does that make sense?
hmm.
So, in other words, if the employees finish their projects on time, but manager doesn't give them a raise, then the boss will
Hmm.
punish the manager,
Yeah.
as an example. Okay, so let's say the employees do not finish their project on time, but the manager still gives them a raise.
Mm.
Is the CEO required to the um, punish the manager? Is the
No,
CEO, why not?
because the CEO doesn't need to know what's happening
Yeah, the CEO
in
doesn't.
the lower,
The CEO,
in like the.
the CEO needs to know because the CEO, if the employees finish their projects on time, the CEO needs to know, or, I'm sorry, the manager will give them a raise, and the CEO needs to know that that happened in order to decide whether to punish the manager or not.
Oh, okay. I see.
Because I'll say it again. Okay, so
Yeah,
the
yeah, yeah.
employees do not turn in their projects on time,
Hmm.
but the manager still gives them a raise.
Right,
Should the CEO punish, or is the CEO required to punish? Let me put it this way. Let's say that the employees do finish their projects on time, but the manager doesn't give them a raise. The
right.
CEO is required to punish the
The
manager
manager.
based on this contract.
Yes.
Okay. What if the employees do not
Hmm.
turn in their projects on time, but the manager does give them a raise?
Yeah.
Does the CEO punish the manager for breaking the contract, or does the CEO not punish them because the contract has not been broken?
Hmm. Um, so if in the contract it's written that if they don't finish their projects on time, and the manager is um, required not to give them a raise. Oh wait,
Think about the conditional. What is that condition? The contract is there are two rules in the contract.
oh, there are two.
If the employees finish their projects on time, turn their projects in on time, the manager must give them a raise. If the manager breaks that contract, the CEO
Hmm.
must punish the manager.
Right.
Okay. So now think about what was specifically specified in that contract. If the employees turn their projects in on time, the manager must give them a raise.
If that's broken,
So
then it gets
that's what's
punished.
specified in the contract.
Hmm.
Now here's what happens. The employees do not turn their projects in on time, but the manager gives them a raise.
Hmm.
Did the manager break the contract? Should the CEO punish the manager?
Yeah,
Okay, tell me why.
I know that that's not the answer, but I'm just going by
That's because you're thinking in terms of like natural reasoning
morality and stuff. Yeah, yeah,
instead of a material conditional, right? But
yeah.
anyway, go
Yep,
ahead. Tell me why.
yep. Okay, let me. Because the whole thing rests on the manager um, giving or not giving a raise to the employees for the CEO,
Wrong.
right? Is it there where
Or
the
for the
break is?
CEO.
Yeah,
No, it doesn't.
it
That's
doesn't.
correct.
Mm.
It has nothing to do with whether or not. I mean, you, that's the thing. You're bringing in that you're treating this too much like an enthymeme. You're bringing in premises that aren't there in what
Mm.
is stated,
Mm-hmm.
right? The CEO is only worried about whether or not the manager broke the contract,
Yeah.
not whether or not he gave the employees a raise.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Right. So
that's the thing.
yeah.
So don't
So if
focus
he's
on that. Focus on
right.
what is literally written in that contract. If the employees turn their projects in on time, the Manager must give them a raise. That's all that's there.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah. So
go ahead.
since that's the only um, rule, there
Mhm.
isn't a there isn't a second rule, right? That's what I was asking earlier.
Yeah,
For
there's a
not
higher order
turning.
rule to determine whether the so this the yeah the CEO is worried about whether that contract is upheld or broken.
Yeah.
If it's not broken, then and here there's something that's a little bit interesting. There's maybe a difference between it being upheld and it not being broken.
Mm.
Okay. Here's why the CEO is not required to punish the manager
Mm.
because the contract didn't say anything about what happens if the employees don't turn their projects in on time.
Right. Right.
All the contract says is if they do that, they get a raise.
Hmm.
But if they don't do that, the manager could give them a raise or not. He's not required to give them a raise. He's not required not to give them a raise because the contract doesn't specify that,
Yeah.
right? So he can give them a raise. He doesn't have to, but he can,
Yeah.
which means the contract has not been broken.
Hmm.
And so the CEO doesn't have to punish the
Yeah.
manager. In fact, should not
Hmm.
punish the manager, is required not to punish the manager um, because the contract has not been broken.
Hmm.
That's why I don't know if I said it correctly the first, I think I did, but
Yeah.
the CEO is worried about this. If the manager breaks the contract, the manager gets punished.
Right.
But the contract wasn't broken because the contract didn't specify what happens if the employees don't
It
turn
did.
the projects in on time,
Mhm.
right? Okay, so thinking about it that way, um, here's another way to think about it. Let's say the employees don't finish their projects on time, and then the manager doesn't give them a raise, but instead lets them watch a movie.
Hmm.
Has the contract been broken?
Yeah. No.
I
Hang
said
on.
they didn't. I said they didn't, or at least I hope I said they didn't turn their projects in on time.
Right. And then the manager
The
uh,
manager
didn't give
doesn't give them a raise, but
them a raise. Right.
also sort of doesn't not give them a raise. The manager does something totally unrelated, like
Yeah.
does a little dance for them. Has the contract been broken?
The uh, contract has not been broken.
Yeah, exactly. So it doesn't even
Yeah.
really matter in that case what the manager does. The contract
Hmm.
can be broken. If the
Hmm.
manager gives them a raise, if the manager doesn't give them a raise, if the manager does something totally unrelated, the contract hasn't been broken because the contract never specified what happens if they don't turn their projects in on time.
Hmm.
So, regardless regardless of what the manager does, if the employees don't turn their projects in on time, the contract is never going to be broken
Bro, yeah.
because the contract didn't specify that. So there's
Hmm.
a way to think about the contract as being true, as being upheld, except that it's a kind of vacuous truth because the contract
Hmm.
never said anything about what happens if the employees don't turn their projects in on time.
Hmm.
That's what we mean by a vacuous truth in a material conditional, and that's why anytime the antecedent is false, the conditional is true
Hmm.
because it's empty. There's nothing there, right? It never specifies anything other than the truth of the antecedent.
Hmm. Okay, that's interesting. Hmm.
Yeah, and that is kind of a strange way to think about conditionals because we usually think about conditionals in terms of like cause and effect or something.
Right.
Um, but if you think about it more in terms of like a contract, where the conditional is a contract,
Right.
and that you can specify something in the contract that will have a consequent,
Hmm.
but if that antecedent is false and the contract doesn't say anything about it, it's still true. It's still upheld because it isn't broken,
Right.
right?
Right.
So,
Right.
yeah, in any case, anytime the antecedent is false, the contract is true, even if they're
Hmm.
completely unrelated things, right? Like if I say
Yeah.
there's a civilization of elephants on the moon, therefore I am the president of the United States, that's true. Or not
Right.
therefore, but rather if there's that, then I'm president of the United States, then that's true.
Yeah.
But it's vacuously true.
Hmm.
And the vacuous truth means that it's true, but only because the antecedent conditions, what actually is the case, was never specified. Or
Right.
the only thing that is specified is false, and so therefore the conditional is still true, but there's like nothing in the antecedent position,
Hmm.
right? And so it's not broken, but it's upheld in a way that is just unspecified.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So in the case of the employees, it's yeah, because like the contrary wasn't set specified, right?
Mhm.
The um in the in the contract
Mhm.
because there was only one rule, right?
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
and the second example you gave, um, it seemed like or whatever. The first one was like fictitious, and then the second one was like, what was the first you saying? If there are elephants on the moon or something,
Oh
or
yeah, if there's a civilization of elephants on the moon,
right?
then
Donald Trump is the
I
president of
am
the
the
United States.
emperor of the universe.
Okay.
That statement is true,
Right. But it
but
seems
it's
like,
vacuously
uh, uh-huh. But isn't there a difference, slight difference between the employee, I don't know if there is, but I'm asking if there is
there
a
is a
slight difference
difference,
between the
but let's
employee.
hear it here.
Yeah.
Let's hear what you think it is.
Um, I don't know. It seems like there's more of a direct
Action.
causal.
There's more of a relevance between the antecedent and the consequent.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
But as I said, with a material conditional
Hmm.
application, the content doesn't matter at all. All that matters
Oh
is
yeah.
truth values,
Yeah.
right? And so that's why I gave you that really weird example where it's like
Yeah. Yeah.
um, these things don't seem to be related at all. But
Yeah.
that doesn't matter for the material conditional because it's only worried about the truth values. It's easier to understand the other one because we always build in relevance to our propositions or whatever. But the content, the relevance of the content doesn't matter for material conditionals. And that's a big
Hmm.
difference between, say, the conditional in Kant and
Hmm.
the hypothetical. He calls it the hypothetical, right? That's in the relation of category or of not category, the the category of relation,
Hmm.
right? Where it's like it seems like when you make that kind of inference, there's got to be some kind of relevance between the ground and the consequent.
Hmm.
But in material implication, there does not need to be any relevance because the content doesn't matter. All that matters is the logical form, including
Yeah.
its truth values and its operation, if then,
Right. Right.
right?
So
And
for something to be valid, it's different, right? It.
well, that's going to have to do with how you make inferences, right? So, like if I say
Hmm.
if P then Q, Q therefore P, that's invalid.
Hmm.
But if P then Q might be true.
Yeah.
Even so, if P then Q is true, Q therefore P, that's invalid. Even if all
Hmm.
those are true, right?
Hmm.
Even if P then Q, Q, let's say if P then Q is true, Q is true, and then I say P and P is true, every premise is true is still invalid,
Yeah.
right? So, but that is a function of a chain of inference, not of a
Hmm.
proposition, right? It's not the truth
Hmm.
value, right? So,
Hmm.
yeah,
So a syllogism would be valid.
But I don't understand your question.
Um,
Syllogism would be valid. I mean, validity is a
uh,
function of syllogisms, yeah,
okay.
or of inferences, right? Not even
Yeah.
necessarily of full syllogisms or whatever, but yeah, yeah.
Okay. Like, so yeah, if A then B, then if B then C, so A then C, that's valid.
Sorry, I didn't catch what you said. What was the syllogism in particular?
Oh, just like if A then B, B then C, so A then C or whatever.
Well, that's true. However, yeah. So the conclusion would be a conditional, right?
Hmm.
Yeah. So that's through transitivity. I mean, that's valid typically.
That's valid. Yeah.
Um, there may be logical systems where you don't always get transitivity in the same way as classical logic. Um,
Mm.
that if you're interested, there are lots and lots of non-classical logics that all have different semantics. In other words,
Mm.
have different rules for validity and equivalence between propositions and this kind of thing.
Okay.
But for classical logic, transitivity is assumed.
Hmm.
Yeah. All right. Shall
Okay.
we jump into the Kant
Yeah.
chapter? We didn't talk about chapter 8 last time. I'm just going over it really quickly to see if there's anything um, super important from it. Um, I mean, he's basically in chapter 8 just giving kind of a lead up to Kant, giving,
Yeah.
um, I think that chapter is called Towards the Object in General, and the object in
Hmm.
general is something he draws from Kant. The object in general is basically, it almost has kind of like the function of substance in Aristotle. It's sort of that which cannot be further, synthesized into a higher order unity. In other words, there's
Yep.
nothing that you can divide to get the object in general. The object in general, in some sense, is like the starting point, at least for cognition of objects,
Yep.
or maybe even cognition of things. I'm not actually totally clear if there's a difference between thing and object in Kant, although I presume that there probably is. I mean, usually
Mm.
objects are synthetic, although, you do have the notion, I think, well, it's been a while. I think you have the notion of the transcendental object, you have the transcendental subject, and I think you also have the transcendental object, although he might not specify that. That's something you might have to reconstruct. I don't remember.
Mm.
I have to go back to my critique of pure reason notes and look that
Yeah.
up. But essentially, the object in general is kind of like the ground for possibility or impossibility. So
Yep.
one thing that he says is whenever you have a distinction, there's got to be some higher order unity that's divided such that that distinction makes sense,
Hmm.
right? So if you've got some distinction between possibility and impossibility, what is that distinction dividing? It's got to be dividing something that is, say, either both or neither possible or impossible, right? Um, and that is given the name of the object in general.
Hmm.
One thing that's kind of interesting, it's also been a week since I read this or so, but one of Kant's predecessors, Sylvester Mauro, um, talks about how expressions like intelligible or knowable apply to everything, even non-being, so that, for instance,
Hmm.
you can talk about non-being and make propositions about it, sentences about it, and maybe even inferences, perhaps. Maybe they're not valid, who knows? But in any case, it seems sensible to talk about nothing.
Hmm.
So nothing, in some sense, is intelligible. Non-being
Yeah.
is intelligible. Um, However, it might signify nothing, right? So that is like this kind of empty container, or something like
Yeah.
that. Yeah, it has like maybe a grammatical position in a sentence. Maybe it doesn't mean anything. But then that reminded me, well, actually, uh, yeah, well, again, I have the same thing basically. In other words, infinite super transcendental terms like non-intelligible are only verbal. There's
Yep.
no real intention that corresponds to them, right? No
Hmm.
reality or anything, right? It's just sort of like a quirk of grammar or something. But
Yeah.
then it
Right.
also sort of reminded me of the self-undermining nature of terms like unknowable or unintelligible. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie The Princess Bride from the 80s.
I'm not.
You should watch it. You know, most people that grew up in, say, North America or England, I suppose, at a certain period, watch that movie like hundreds of times. It's like a classic
Hmm.
movie. It's a really great movie. Um, there's a character who's supposed to be like, so there are a bunch of villains that kidnap a princess, and one is really strong, one is a really good sword fighter, and then one is like a philosopher who's like the person who makes all the strategy, but he's a terrible philosopher. Um, and he keeps saying, inconceivable. So, like, there's a guy who's chasing them to rescue the princess, and they keep trying to kill him. And every time they try to kill him, they fail. And it's like they're supposed to be the best at what they do, but this guy keeps escaping all these traps that they lay for him. And every time that happens, the philosopher guy says, inconceivable. And then the character who's the sword fighter says, you keep saying that word. I don't think it means what you think it means. But here's the thing about inconceivable, it never means what you think it means because it's self undermining.
Yeah.
If X is inconceivable, it's conceivable,
Yeah.
right? And so there's a sort of built in paradox to the term,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Which is perhaps a pretty good argument against certainly any kind of existential import um, to infinite names, right? I
Hmm.
mean, not every infinite name is self-undermining in the same way, um, but if you are applying it to these super transcendental terms, these terms that are supposed to organize even the transcendental terms, like for instance,
Hmm.
knowable, conceivable,
Yeah.
intelligible. If you infinitize those, then it's a paradox, right? And
Hmm.
it's interesting that you can get it in just one word. You don't have to do much, uh, you know, logic to figure out that inconceivable is a paradoxical word.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so in any case, is there anything else? I mean, one way that people try to deal with this, and it in a certain way, it starts to um, seem very similar to the way that people deal with Kant's idea of the thing in itself, right? If you can't
Mm.
know anything about the thing in itself, how can you even say anything about the thing in itself?
Right.
Um, so you've got this guy, Antonio Bernaldo de Quiros, non-intelligible, the term non-intelligible cannot be directly known, but we may indirectly infer things about it, right?
Mm.
We can indirectly infer um, things about nothing.
Right.
You can't know anything about nothing directly, but you can say something like nothing is not something.
Yeah.
So, you know, maybe through negation, or maybe there are other ways to kind of get around the edges of it, even though you can't directly predicate anything of it,
Yeah.
you know? Um,
Yeah, that's interesting. Just thinking about logic and we were talking about rules and stuff earlier,
mhm,
and and this idea that we can't know it, but we can infer it,
mhm.
and that we are able to do that as though it's like somehow. there's some rules in our cognitive system or something that we just naturally happen to follow.
Mhm.
Um, Seems like logic or whatever sometimes has an upper hand towards accessing
Mhm.
unknowable things as opposed to direct experience or
Well, yeah, that's true. I mean, but actually, not even unknowable things. I mean, um, you can never directly experience negation.
yeah.
You can look at it this way. Like I can
Mm.
say, there is no whale in my bathtub. You cannot draw a picture that shows there's no whale in my bathtub. You can draw a bathtub.
yeah.
You can draw a whale. You could put a line through a whale, but none of that is negating the whale being in the bathtub, except
Yep.
understood in a linguistic way. Like I can treat those pictures as elements of a language. Like the
Yeah.
picture whale means whale. The
Yeah.
bathtub means the picture bathtub means bathtub. The line means negation. But that line is only conventional because if there were a whale in a bathtub and there were like a metal bar, laying across that's not negation. You can't draw negation. In other words, you
Hmm.
can't experience negation,
Yeah.
right? It's like how do you you can try to approach it through failed expectations. Like if you try to set up in a piece of music an expectation that something's going to happen and then it doesn't happen, but that's still not a negation,
Hmm.
right? Because you always have what you have in experience. You don't have the negation of what you have,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
That is something about language and logic that is not available to experience,
Yeah.
except experience understood perhaps in a Kantian way, or in the way of Wilfrid Sellars, as always already employing elements of logic,
Hmm.
so that it does sort of seem like we kind of experience absences, but
Mm.
we only experience absences in the following sense: having experience that is thoroughly organized by logical operations and categories, right?
Yeah.
Because just the experience itself, or just the perception or sensation itself, can't be negative,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
It is interesting though with the object in general. So it's the ground of possibility, but it is actually the ground of the distinction between possibility and impossibility.
Yep.
I mean, I suppose to follow Kant on that, thinkable, unthinkable would also have to have a higher order unity, unless unthinkable is just strictly paradoxical. So
Mm.
maybe thinkable doesn't actually have an antonym. Something is either thinkable. I mean, here's one way to say it. Like, there's a difference between known and unknown, which could have a higher order unity, everything that exists, whether you know it or not,
Yeah.
right? But knowable versus known, or thinkable versus unthinkable. It's
Hmm.
not clear that unthinkable has any meaning
Mm.
if it's paradoxical, because in thinking it, it's not unthinkable,
Hmm.
right? So that might be one way of getting around it.
Mm.
Impossibility doesn't have that problem, I suppose, because there are cognitions that are impossible, right? Just by definition, impossible, this kind of thing. You know,
Yeah.
you can't experience, I mean, causality never traffics in impossibilities. That's also a logical thing. You can never experience something impossible.
Hmm.
Well, you know that author, he wrote that book, Sapiens. I don't know if you read that. It's kind
Oh
of
yeah.
a popular philosophy book or
Yeah.
history, anthropology book. There's a
Yeah.
sentence in that I think is really good. He's talking about biology, but this is true of all the natural sciences. If a thing is possible, it's natural.
Mm.
In other words, nothing impossible is natural.
Mm.
Possibility is a function of logic, or it's a category of logic. right? You can never see something impossible. Anything you
Yeah,
see is necessarily possible,
possible. Yeah.
right? But that's not true of thought or
Mm,
logic because you can have things that are false by definition, in which case they're impossible.
yeah.
And so for that reason, there's got to be like this higher order kind of unity, the object in general, that grounds that distinction. Because if there's not something that's dividing, then the very notion of distinction doesn't make any sense.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
actually, you can kind of see that with the transcendentals last week. What was it?
Oh, between the universals and the difference between the universal and the transcendental or something?
Yeah, just a second. I can't remember now, but yeah, I don't remember. But I was watching the video from last week and I realized that there's kind of a shortcut to figure out why you can't infinitize transcendental terms like being good, one thing, something, and so on. And
Oh,
um, now I don't remember. Oh well, I'll go back to that video and watch it, and then I'll maybe send you an email.
yeah.
I don't remember. But in any case, so the object in general is supposed to be the ground of possibility, right? It's what underwrites our ability to distinguish between possible and impossible things.
Hmm.
Um, and so that actually leads us to chapter 8 or chapter 9 kind of nicely. I'll try to jump through this as quickly as possible. There's a lot of detail in this chapter, and I'm going to just present what I take to be the most important argument here. Essentially, what I take the point of this chapter to be is to show, first of all, that unlike the claims of people like Schopenhauer and a number of Kant commentators who thought that the infinite judgment did nothing that the negative judgment didn't do,
Mm.
and actually say that Kant just was sort of like OCD or kind of like autistic and just had to have like a symmetrical system or something. So he only has affirmation and negation, so he has to throw that third thing in there because other categories have three and so on. But
Three. Yeah.
it
Hmm.
doesn't amount to anything that's not already there in affirmation and negation. So, Heller Roazan is pushing back
Hmm.
against that, showing that no, actually, for Kant, the infinite judgment does something that the affirmative and the negative don't do, and it's something really significant. It's something that is necessary for cognition at all. Um, Probably even, it's constitutive experience in its own specific way.
Hmm.
Um, Now, the other thing that it's going to do is show, or at least lay the ground for an explanation of why people assume that we need God to explain existence. Okay, so I'll try to get through this. You just read it. What do you think about that? Can you say anything about this?
Um, well, yeah, I think, I mean, also because we've read a bunch of stuff about beauty, and
Yeah.
I, I think the third um, category, the infinite category, kind of gets closer to art as opposed to affirmation and negation. This idea of like liminal um, things, or even like it brought up Chris Davis' abject, or
Hmm.
the idea of the corpse and stuff, where it's
Hmm.
a thing and a non-thing or whatever
Yeah. Yeah.
at the same time. Um,
Yeah.
so that's kind of what I
Okay. Well, let me go
had it.
through my
Yeah.
let me go through my outline. Just because I want to kind of stick close to what is really written in this chapter
Hmm.
without trying to apply it to other things that aren't specifically in the chapter, because I think that it's kind of nice because it approaches it in a way that is distinct from aesthetics,
Hmm.
and is really very focused on the first critique and not the third critique. And I
Hmm.
think that it's sort of interesting to look if the idea, first of all, it's well um, known, or at least well believed, that Kant's definition of judgment changes from the first critique to the third critique, and so infinite judgment might be functioning slightly differently in the third critique. So that's an interesting
Hmm.
question, but this chapter is really only talking about first critique, and in particular, the constitutive role of infinite judgments in the cognition of objects, um, and also as a way to critique or deflate the idea that you cannot explain existence except through a supreme being.
Hmm.
Okay, so I'll just go through
Hmm.
the outline because I think
Yeah.
it lays. First of all, I kind of jumped around in the outline, so it's not in the same
Mm.
order as in the chapter, but it's because I was trying to make a streamlined argument that is perhaps more clear and more powerful. So let's just go through this, and I'll try not to dwell on each thing because I know we only have a little bit of time. So first of all, just as you probably know, the big project in the critique of pure reason is that um, Kant asks, how is it possible that we can know things? How is it possible that we can experience things? And what he does is a transcendental deduction where he says, well, look, we take experience, for instance, as a given, and then we ask what are the conditions for the possibility of experience, right? One way of saying that is what are the conditions that enable and limit knowledge of things? Now, one thing to say about that is that there is a distinction between transcendental logic and general logic, which I think we've talked about before. General logic is essentially Aristotelian logic, but it is focused on the form of sentences, you
Mm.
know, like S is P, S is not P, S is non-P, right? But it doesn't say anything about the value or content of uh, of those propositions. And transcendental logic is supposed to lay the groundwork for how we apply the formal system of logic to the experience of objects. And so it is, in a way, object oriented or content oriented in a way that general logic isn't. General logic is really kind
Hmm.
of abstract and formal. Okay, so here's how I unpack the argument. We only know things negatively. That is
Hmm.
to say, whenever you know that, say, I don't know, that animal out there is a dog. I'm looking at an animal and it's a dog. Okay, well, um, you can see there that there's a process of division, a principle of division. This is something already that Aristotle talks about, right? Like, what does mammal mean? Well, I only know mammal by dividing the concept animal. And I only know dog by dividing the concept mammal, right?
Hmm.
That is to say that mammal means what it means because it doesn't mean the other things, right? It's like I say, not all of that,
Hmm.
and that means this, right? And so one way to see it, the sort of negative moment there is division itself um, has a negative aspect to it. Whenever I divide, I say that I'm only taking half and I'm getting rid of the other half or something, right? Now, what's interesting about that is that um, that moment of division is both negative because I'm getting rid of a lot of stuff that used to belong to the unity, but at the same time, it is affirmative because I'm giving shape to some division of the thing. And you can think about
Hmm.
it like I take like, sculpting. If you're a
Yeah.
sculptor, taking that as a metaphor, because I think it makes it easy to understand. Let's say you've got a big block of stone and you chunk it away and you throw away. a big chunk of the stone. You've just negated part of the stone. But that
Yeah.
same act of negation also is starting to give form to a division in the stone.
Yep.
And it's the same thing that that motion, that moment of negation is also a moment of affirmation,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so,
Yep.
you can think about it in terms of specification, right? Knowledge by
Mm-hmm.
specification. When I say that animal out there is a dog named Charlie, it's a Chihuahua or something. What I've done is given you a statement that is constantly specifying. That animal, I'm going to specify it as mammal, I'm going to specify it as dog, I'm going to specify it as this dog. Each of those moments of specification has that aspect of negation and affirmation.
Mm-hmm.
Getting rid of stuff, but I'm also starting to give form to something
Yep.
specific, some division, right? Uh, okay. Now, here's the thing. How far up can you go with that? I've got
Mm-hmm.
animal, mammal, dog. Well, I could go higher than animal. Certainly, I could say living thing. I could go higher than living thing. I could say thing. It seems like the very notion of that kind of specification, which is required for knowledge, presupposes some undivided totality,
Mm.
right? Like, what's you got to divide something, right? It's like this. Maybe there's a form of Agrippa's trilemma there, you know. Although, I mean, how far can you divide? Is it infinite? Is
Mm-hmm.
there something that can be divided but itself is not a division, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, but we don't really need to worry about how far it goes. All we need to say is that if knowledge means specification, which means division, then that presupposes some undivided totality, right?
Yep.
Okay. Uh, Now, that is a necessary ground for specifying things. However, it extends far beyond what we could ever experience. Of course, you can't experience absolute undivided totality of possibility, the sum total of possibility.
Mm-hmm.
Just because it could never be something you could experience, it must be an idea of reason,
Yep.
right? Um, can't be given to us as an object because there's never going to be any perception of it. It's only
Mm-hmm.
available intelligibly. Okay, and then um, I've got the infinite judgments and their logical function. This is really just stating the same kind of thing, but with respect to the structure of the infinite judgment. The
Mm-hmm.
infinite judgment has, okay, so maybe we could compare it to affirmation and negation. In the affirmative judgment, what you're doing is saying this object belongs in the sphere of this concept. In negation, you're saying I'm excluding the concept or the object from this concept, which is just like throwing away the stone that you're not
Yeah.
going to use, right?
Yep.
But the infinite judgment is like the sculpting, where it's both negation and
Mm-hmm.
affirmation, right? That
Mm-hmm.
is to say that there's some kind of structuring uh, element to or structuring moment, affirmative moment in the infinite judgment. It's not just negative,
Mm-hmm.
because in addition to denying the concept applies to the predicate, or I'm sorry, in addition to denying that the concept or predicate applies to the object, it also places the object in the infinite space of possibility left over after exhausting the sphere of the predicate that you have negated in the infinite judgment. So it's like putting
Yep.
it in the sphere. Um, One way of thinking about that, though, is that the infinite judgment, unlike the sculpting uh,
Mm.
metaphor, is that even with the sculpting metaphor, the block of stone was still finite.
Yeah.
What the infinite judgment does, however, is it's like sculpting infinity. Instead of like a
Hmm.
finite block of stone, it's like sculpting from infinity.
Yeah.
Because all it does is place the object in the sphere of the non-P predicates, right?
Yeah.
Which
Yeah.
is infinite. Okay. Uh, let's see if I have anything new here. Yeah, I'll read the affirmative moment in the infinite judgment. So an infinite judgment, in addition to negating the predicate, also affirms the logical expanse of total determination. That's like that. The infinity of spheres means like instead of a block of stone, it's everything
Everything.
non-P, everything otherwise than
Right.
P. Um, so let's see, in the Yeshe logic, which is a work that is often cited, but it's not part of the critiques. Gives you a lot of detail for how he thinks about logic that he doesn't specifically state in any of the critiques. Uh, he says that the sphere of non-A is not a sphere, but a limit shared with infinity. So that
Mm.
it's not that the non-P is itself like a positive sphere. It is like this boundary, this infinite boundary, or this boundary to infinity, or it's a boundary shared with infinity, with the infinite. Uh, and that limits are positive concepts of restricted objects. So I haven't used the same kind of language here, but restriction means affirmation,
Mm.
right? You can think about it like this. When I carve the stone, I'm excluding lots of stone, but I'm also restricting the stone that I'm keeping. And when the sculpture is finished, it's a restricted object from the block of stone. So
Yeah.
restriction is positive because it's giving form,
Yeah.
but exclusion is negative. And so, when you limit a concept, what you're doing is essentially this, you could still keep the sculpting metaphor here.
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
And then I have here that Beatrice Languines, who's a pretty famous Kant scholar, says this, that the mind generates the complete logical space of possibility through the discursive activity that infinite judgments make possible, right? So when
Hmm.
you think about it this way, so there's been this question about whether infinite judgments are just linguistic or whether they're logical, like they actually are doing something, or is it just a quirk of grammar? What
Yeah.
Languines is arguing is that, well, the mind has this power of discursive activity, language, this kind of thing. And through that power, it's able to generate a notion of the complete logical space of possibility. The
Hmm.
complete logical space of possibility is like that super stone that is everything, that is
Right.
the sculpture,
Hmm.
right? Instead of just the finite blocks. So that's this idea of the sum total of possibility in the
Yeah.
sculpting metaphor. You only get there because of the infinite judgment. The infinite
Hmm.
judgment presupposes this infinite space of possibility that you could sculpt concepts from, right?
Yeah.
Um, okay. The next bit is a little bit hard, and I'm not sure that I'm interpreting Kant correctly, but I'll go for it anyway. So sum total of possibility, that's just the same thing as this infinite stone that we sculpt from, right?
Yeah.
Um, In Religion and Rational Theology, Kant says the thoroughgoing possibility of everything must be encountered within existence as a whole, or at least since this is the only way in which the principle of thoroughgoing determination makes it possible for a reason to distinguish between the possible and the actual. And here's my interpretation of that. And I don't know if it's totally right, but
Hmm.
it makes sense anyway. Actuality can only be known empirically.
Hmm.
Why is that? Does that make sense to you? This is maybe
Well,
not obvious from what we've said so far. Um, it does seem that that's what he's saying because he says the thoroughgoing possibility of everything
speaking.
must be encountered within existence as a whole. Um, no, no, it's the next bit where he says, encountering with an existence as a whole is the only way in which thoroughgoing determination makes it possible to distinguish between actuality and possibility. So
Mm,
thoroughgoing determination, he spends a lot of time in this. Essentially, thoroughgoing determination means uh, there are people before Kant, say Baumgarten and Wolff too, Christian Wolff, Christian Wolff, who uh, who basically say that thoroughgoing determination essentially means existence. If something exists, it's thoroughly determined. If something's thoroughly
mm,
determined, it exists in actuality. And
mm-hmm,
so it's this sense of a thing actually, I suppose, having all the properties it has and not having any of the properties it doesn't have.
mm,
That's what it means for it to be actual, like
determined.
it really
Mm,
exists, something like that.
mm-hmm,
Um, Kant adds a little bit to that because he says that's true against the backdrop of the sum total of possibility. But essentially, thoroughgoing determination is a way of describing a thing's actuality.
mm-hmm,
And so he says that we must experience thoroughgoing possibility of everything within existence as a whole. It must be encountered that way. And at least if it's, we might not know whether it must be encountered within existence as a whole, but the principle of thoroughgoing determination, which I guess one way of saying it is that it's at least in principle possible to know everything about an object in terms of its
mm,
properties or something, right? That is something that can only be experienced within existence as a whole, whether there is only one existence, as opposed to say like a multitude of possible worlds or something like that that actually exist. We could never know because our experience forces us to take, space, for instance, as one undivided totality.
yeah.
Um, Existence as a whole, we take to be something that is undivided, right? It's not like we encounter things where a little bit of it is from this reality and a little bit of it is from this reality and whatever. We encounter things as being in one undivided reality.
Mm-hmm,
I take it that's what existence as a whole means. So my
mm,
translation of this all is actuality can only be known empirically in encounters. All
mm-hmm,
encounters must be assumed to take place in one unified existence, not isolated possible worlds, for instance. That's what existence as a whole means.
mm-hmm,
Possibility is known a priori. Remember, you can't
mm,
experience, I mean, I suppose you experience, maybe I should say impossibility can only be known a priori, right?
mm,
But impossibility presupposes possibility. You can't have impossibility without the notion of possibility, right? And when you experience a thing, you can never experience something impossible.
yeah.
Another way of looking at it is that you can deduce the possibility of a thing that you would never experience, like, for instance, the existence of God,
Mm-hmm,
right? So possibility can be known a priori. I suppose if you experience something, you also experience it as possible. But the possibility doesn't really come from the experience so much as from the intellect, right?
yeah.
Yeah. So, possibility is known a priori, whether or not you experience the thing that you're calling possible. And that the notion of possibility presupposes the sum total of possibility, right? And you can
Mm,
think back to maybe think about it this way. If you've got the stone and you're going to sculpt something, there are many, many different possibilities that you can get out of the stone. But those possibilities presuppose the stone,
mm-hmm,
right? In other words,
mm-hmm,
there's the very notion of possibility presupposes maybe the potential or the power to divide the thing in different
mm-hmm,
ways. right? So that's why I say that the notion of possibility presupposes the sum total of possibility. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Hmm.
Well, just think about it. You could do it with music, but I think sculpting is just an easier analogy. I mean, you've got a block of stone. Why did you make a dog instead of a giraffe? I could have done
Hmm.
both. Well, I couldn't
Yeah.
have done both. I could have done one or the other.
Yeah. Hmm.
But that possibility, if it were instead of a block of stone, if it were a bucket of water, it doesn't have those possibilities. It has other possibilities. But those
Hmm.
possibilities are presupposed in, yeah, or rather they presuppose the water or the stone or whatever, the thing that is to be divided,
Hmm.
right? Now
Hmm.
think about it not just as a little block of stone, but infinity.
Yeah.
And now you can see that any possibility presupposes the division of the sum total of possibility,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
Okay. Um,
Yeah.
now, um, again, I'll just say it, the sum total of possibility is an ideal of reason. It's not something you could ever experience, right? It
Right.
extends far beyond what could ever possibly be experienced by a finite mind, a finite body. Um,
Hmm.
but it is still the ground for the notion of possibility.
Hmm.
It's a subjective ground. It's not objective. You couldn't experience it. It's something that reason generates through
Yeah.
its discursive activity of, for instance, infinite judgments.
Yeah.
And that, it's not something that we're ever going to encounter as actual because it's
Mm.
not something you can experience. However, that doesn't matter. It's still presupposed in the very idea of possibility. And so it's the ground of possibility.
Hmm.
Is that clear? I hope I'm being clear.
Yeah. No, it's interesting that you can go from a possibility, like let's say carving a stone in a particular pattern, to the, the sum total of all
Well, just think
possibilities.
about
And
what you're saying when you're saying X is possible.
right.
I mean, what you're saying is that X can happen, but it doesn't have to, which
Yeah.
means there are different ways it can go.
Ways to do.
But what is
Right.
this thing that you're dividing between possible and some other possibility or impossible or something like that,
Yeah, that makes sense.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's the idea,
Mm.
right?
Hmm.
I still think
Right.
sculpting is the easiest way to think about that
Yeah.
because that's
Yeah.
obvious, right? It's like you could make a giraffe, you could make a dog, you could make something, whatever, abstract. You some of them might be compatible, right? You might have enough stone left over to do more than one or combine them in different ways or whatever, but um, most of them are not going to, they're both possible, like any of those different things are possible, but you have to choose one or the other or whatever. But in any case, any of that possibility presupposes the sphere within which they're possible.
Yeah. It reminds me of like some free will arguments also, right?
Somewhat.
Free will arguments.
Well, let's not worry about that because we don't have much time. I want to get to
Yeah.
the rest of the.
Yeah.
Okay, so anyway, something really interesting has happened, however, which is that
Mm.
we have determined, um, first of all, if something is actual, it's also possible.
Hmm.
If something is possible, it must presuppose the total sum of possibility. But all of that can be done, in a sense, through logical functions, right? That we
Hmm.
could say, thinking in terms of infinite judgment, the sphere of possibility, the sphere of everything left out from non-P, and so on. Previously, in the tradition, people would often use this as an argument for God, for instance, right? That God is the
Mm.
ground of being because something must ground objective being. And Kant agrees, something must ground our awareness of objective being. But here's the problem. That thing that grounds objective being need not be an object itself.
Hmm.
It might
Hmm.
simply be a function of reason, right? An
Yeah.
ideal of reason that's required for any of these concepts of possibility or specification or whatever to make sense. But
Hmm.
that doesn't mean that that sort of totality of possibility is something, is a being, like a god or something like that. It's just something, it's just the way that reason works,
Yeah.
right? And there are a few different ways of looking at it. But what I'll say is simply that, he, he talks about hypothesization, which is just I don't know if you know the word reification. Have you ever heard that before? Thingification.
I think it came up in Adorno or something.
Yeah,
Like,
it's a fairly
yeah.
common term. Hypothesization basically means the same thing as reification. It's when you turn some kind of activity into a thing. That's what it
Hmm.
really means. And here, what's going on is turning the activity of reason, the
Hmm.
ideals of reason that are presupposed in, like activities like knowing things or even experiencing things or whatever, turning that into a thing is
Yeah.
like reification. And essentially, that's
Mm.
what Kant says is happening with
Hmm.
the tradition that posits that we know that God exists because things exist and there must be some ground of being,
Hmm.
right? And what Kant replaces that with is the infinite judgment, which has the following function of underwriting the relationship between the sum total of possibility, which had been God in the earlier tradition, the relationship between that and how we know specific things, particular things, right? That
Hmm.
can only know particular things against the backdrop of the sum total of possibility. But how do you connect those things, the things you know and the sum total of possibility? It's in the infinite judgment.
Mm.
Infinite judgment is what connects that. At least that's what Heller Rosen is arguing here. Um, And so, there's maybe another way to look at it from unity, the idea of unity. Um, you know, like the transcendental unity of apperception means that we always experience the world as unified in our consciousness, in a single consciousness. But
Hmm.
that unity, which is sort of like a function of, say, transcendental reason, or it might be even deeper than that. I think it's a function of the transcendental subject or something like that. But the point is that you can think of unity as a particular way of describing how reason works.
Hmm.
But then it's easy to mistake the fact that experience is unified with the experience of a unity.
Mm. Hmm.
So think about that for a while, for a week or whenever,
Yeah.
what's the difference between, experiencing the world as unified with, or rather, yeah, the difference between experiencing the world as unified, versus experiencing a unity.
Hmm. It seems
And,
like there's a limit with when you say experiencing unity, as like it's restricted, and
well,
when you're
yeah, I
saying
mean, essentially what it is it's the difference between understanding unity as a function of experience, as a
hmm.
something that is like maybe it's a transcendental condition for experience versus experiencing unity as an object. We don't really experience unity as an object, right? In just the same way that, like, for Hume we don't really experience causality, but it's there in our experience. It's just we don't experience it as an object. But
Yeah.
it is very subtle because you know it's easy to mistake what reason is doing, say, in synthesizing, or the understanding is doing in synthesizing experience into a unity
Mm.
with experiencing unity as an object. And I think Kant is making the same sort of claim with respect to the sum total of possibility and the sum total of possibility as an object, God, or something like that. It's a little bit different
Yeah, yeah.
because the predecessors don't necessarily claim that you experience God as an object, but it's a similar kind of move of reifying what the understanding is doing in sort of constituting experience of things,
Hmm.
or knowledge, the conditions for knowledge of things, um, confusing that with an object that sort of does it, right? And it's
Mm.
turning something like a connection of relationships or activities or functions for a thing, an
Yeah,
object. And
yeah.
when you do that, then you say, well, what are the properties of that thing? It must have eternal existence. It must have all this kind of stuff that you attribute
Hmm.
to God. But that's just a fallacy, according to Kant.
Hmm.
It's misrecognizing the sort of relational functioning of the understanding for an object,
Hmm.
right? Well, I got through the chapter, so hopefully,
Yeah,
hopefully that makes sense. I think that that is the main insight from this chapter, and I think it's kind of interesting. As I said, it doesn't necessarily touch on aesthetics, and so I think it would be
yeah.
interesting to try to apply some of that to aesthetics. But this is what Heller Arousing anyway is saying is the purpose of the infinite judgment in the Critique of Pure Reason. That
Hmm.
it's not just an ornament,
Yeah.
to have a nice
Right, right.
system. It's actually doing something absolutely necessary for um, cognizing the world.
Yeah. Yeah, I keep going back to the sculpting example you gave and earlier when you were talking about or when you were comparing the infinite judgment
Hmm.
to the sculpting and I was thinking that yeah, the actual act of sculpting or the activity of sculpting is itself maybe closer to the infinite judgment
Hmm.
because we're talking about
Yeah.
activity and not a single um, object or whatever.
Hmm.
Because if you think about the affirmation, which is like maybe um, the stone or whatever is being carved, and the negation is whatever is being thrown.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, and when it comes to the infinite judgment, I I don't know. I think it makes more sense to talk about the activity itself because like I don't know how you would talk about the infinite judgment
Well,
in
yeah,
that
there's
example.
there's a yeah, so there's some question about what judgments are as opposed to
Hmm.
say statements or propositions. If judgments are sort of like almost like Phrygian senses or Platonic forms or something like this kind of almost sort of like timeless description of the world or something. Now,
Hmm.
I mean, they're
Hmm.
abstract, so they could be applied to contingent states of affairs too, and whatever. But the point is it sort of this like inert description of the world, or is judgment an activity,
Hmm.
right? And since say Wilfrid Sellars and Robert Brandom and a number of other people, they interpret Kant with respect to judgment as um, laying down a theory for how the mind acts with respect to, say, the objects of consciousness or whatever, right? That is to say that when the table of judgments is like a table of different things the mind does, at least in the transcendental form of them, right? It's different
Hmm.
things that the mind does um, to cognize the world, to experience the world, right? And
Yeah.
so, yeah, there is a tradition of treating judgments as being really active in the world,
Hmm.
not just sort of
Hmm.
passive statements about the world.
Yeah.
And I think that that's probably the most adequate way to think about what Kant is doing because, he is talking about how the mind isn't a passive receptor that,
Yeah.
then labels things in the world. The mind is
Yeah.
constructing the world in experience,
Yeah.
right? And so then that means that judgments really are activities.
Hmm.
activities of synthesizing reality as it must be for us, right?
Hmm.
Um, and so, yeah, I mean, I think you can see that with the infinite judgment, you know, and when you take the analogy of sculpting, maybe it makes it really obvious or clear or something. I'll say that judgments can also be statements, um,
Yeah.
because describing is also an activity.
Hmm.
But to remember that, at least on this reading of Kant, any description is always sort of an interpretation, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
That it's never completely sort of this absolute or um, infinite intellect that says things that must be true for all times and all places for everything. Except actually, there are
Yeah.
some exceptions to that in Kant, but at least with respect to experience, you can describe experience, but to understand that those descriptions are also activities.
Hmm.
A similar way to how synthesizing experience is an activity, and judgments play a role in both.
Yeah. Yeah. Last week you mentioned, I have to go soon. About uh, like theories and how there's a lot of um, background assumptions and stuff that
Mm-hmm.
is usually left out,
Mm-hmm.
um, and I don't know. It's like just talking about negation, and it seems like that's always happening where things are being left out or being negated
Mm-hmm.
um, constantly. Seems
Mm-hmm.
like in every moment, or um, I don't know. Maybe that's like for some other session, or because is
Mm-hmm.
that what Robert Brandon talks about? Is
Oh,
or
maybe.
were you? Do you? Yeah, okay.
I haven't read enough of his original stuff to
Yeah.
know what he has to say about negation.
Hmm.
Um, but negation is always one of the more complicated elements of trying to make Kant, say, an epistemological pragmatist or something,
Mm.
because, as I said, you never, I mean, what does it mean to say you experience a negation?
Yeah.
Unless experience is always uh, um, theory laden, right? If
Uh-huh.
experience always is presupposing um, this, not that,
Hmm.
right? As opposed to simply this, which
Hmm.
seems right. Um, the very notion that you can distinguish things in experience seems to suggest that you are performing, sorry, my daughter's calling. You are performing both affirmations and negations and so on when you experience something. Um,
Yeah.
anyway, I think I got to go. So
Yeah.
let me just, do you want to meet next week or,
Yeah.
okay. Uh,
Say Thursday.
yeah. And let's try to punch through the rest of this book if possible. I'll have
Yeah. Yeah.
more time this week.
Yeah. There's some stuff about Ficta and
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Adra. Yeah.
If you have specific chapters you'd rather read and maybe skip over some, you can let me know now as soon as
Yeah.
possible over an email or so.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
All right.
next Thursday or next Wednesday?
Thursday is good. I think like a
Okay.
week
All
to
right.
get
Sounds good.
through. Okay.
I'll see you
All
then.
right.
Bye bye.
Okay. See you. Bye.